Welcome to Stories and Tea with Mrs. Straka, Episode 7. All right. Today, by the way, this is my Indonesian teacup, which is why it has the lid. And the lid actually sits upside down, and there's a filter that's normally in here for the tea. I already took it out. But it sits and rests on the lid because the lid rests flat because of that handle. So there you go. Fun fact about today's tea. All right. We are back in Summer of the Monkeys, beginning in Chapter 2. It was about 3 miles to the store, and I nearly ran Rowdy's legs off getting there. I was pretty sure that when I told my grandpa about the monkey, he'd know what to do about it. My grandpa was one of those old, slow-moving, boy-loving kind of grandpas. He and I had been pals for as long as I could remember. He'd do anything he could for me, and I'd do anything I could for him. If you were looking at the outside of my grandpa, you wouldn't see very much. He was just about as big around the middle as he was tall. He didn't have much hair either, just a little around the edges, and it was as gray and stiff as a wild hog's whiskers. He wore glasses, chewed tobacco, and needed a shave about 360 days a year. It was the inside of my grandpa that really counted. He had a heart as big as a number 4 washtub, and inside that wrinkled old hide of his was enough boy understanding for all the boys in the world. On entering the store, I saw Grandpa over behind the counter setting canned goods on a shelf. He didn't hear me when I came in. Of course, I was barefooted and didn't make any more noise than a lizard walking on a rail fence. I eased up right behind him and said in a voice much too loud, "Grandpa, Rowdy treat a monkey." I saw my old grandpa flinch, just about like I always did when a wasp dabbed his fiery little dagger into me. He took his time about turning around. Ducking his head, he looked at me over his glasses. Then he looked at Rowdy. Rowdy was just sitting there on his rear, looking at Grandpa. His long ears were sticking straight up, and his tongue was hanging out about a foot. Grandpa must have liked what he saw. He grinned a little and said, "Now let's do that all over again. Only this time, don't talk so loud." "You mean you want me to go back outside, Grandpa, and come in again just like I did?" I asked. No, Grandpa said, waving his hand. "You don't have to go back outside. Just say all that all over again." "Oh," I said. I swallowed a couple times and tried hard to control my voice. "Rowdy treat a monkey." Grandpa nodded his head and said, "Uh-huh. That's what I thought you said. I wanted to be sure, though. Are you sure it was a monkey?" "Sure as I need a haircut, Grandpa," I said. It was a monkey, all right. It had a skinny tail, 4 long legs, a baby-looking face, and hair all over it. Papa thinks it was a pet monkey that belonged to a fisherman and got away from him. Grandpa thought a second. Then, shaking his head, he said, "No, I don't think it belonged to a fisherman. Is one monkey all that Rowdy treed?" "That's all I saw, Grandpa," I said. "But I believe there was something else around there. I heard a lot of noises." Grandpa's bushy eyebrows jumped straight up. "Noises? What kind of noises?" "I don't know what kind of noises there were, Grandpa," I said. "I heard all kinds of noises in the bottoms, and I usually don't know what's making them, but I've never heard anything like that before. It sounded like cries and squeals and barks and grunts and everything else. It scared me into a running fit." Grandpa got all excited. He took off his glasses, and I saw a twinkle in his friendly old eyes. Then, very seriously, he said, "I'm pretty sure those noises you heard were more monkeys. It sure sounds like it. From what I understand, there were probably about 30 of them." "30?" I exclaimed. My eyes got big as bur oak acorns. "Boy, that's a lot of monkeys, Grandpa. Are you sure?" "I can't be positive," Grandpa said, "but I'd be willing to bet my last bucket of molasses on it." "Grandpa, do you know something about these monkeys?" I asked. Rearing back and looking as important as Rowdy did when he had treed something, Grandpa said, "Sure I know something about those monkeys. That's what grandpas are for, isn't it? To know things for boys?" I grinned and said, "Yes, sir, I guess so." It didn't surprise me too much to find out that my grandpa knew something about the monkey. I was firmly convinced he was the smartest man in those Ozark Hills anyhow. He knew a little bit about everything. He knew where all the best fishing holes were and the right kind of bait to use. He knew the best places to hunt and the right time to go hunting. It did seem, though, that all the good things my grandpa knew about were things that I liked. Pointing to the counter, Grandpa said, "Sit down, and I'll tell you about it. Believe me, this monkey business is a good thing. It's a real good thing for you." Good for me, I said as I climbed up on the counter. What's good about it, Grandpa? Shoving his hands in his pockets and looking down at the floor, Grandpa said, well, let's see now. To begin with, I think you've been wanting a pony and a 22, haven't you? I sure have, I said. I've been wanting a pony and a 22 ever since the day I was born. Every boy in the hills has a pony and a gun but me, but things like that cost so much money it doesn't look like I'll ever have them. Oh, I wouldn't say that, said Grandpa. If things go right, you could be riding and shooting before you know it. Aw, Grandpa, I said, feeling sorry for myself. How am I ever going to get enough money to buy a pony and a 22? A 22's a gun, by the way. By catching those monkeys, Grandpa said. That's how you're gonna get it. They're worth a lot of money. You mean their skins, Grandpa? I asked. Sorry. Are monkey skins worth anything? No! No! Grandpa said. Don't even think about skinning them. No, sir, that's the last thing in the world you want to do. They'll have to be taken alive and not harmed in any way. Taken alive? I said. Why, Grandpa, how in the world am I going to do that? I don't know anything about catching monkeys. I've caught coons and possums and skunks and everything else, but not monkeys. Sticking out his chin, Grandpa said, well, I'm no expert monkey catcher either, but we're going to catch 'em just the same. There's a big reward being offered for those monkeys. When I heard Grandpa mention a reward, I flew completely out of gear. Reward, I said, jumping down from the counter. How much is it? Now, wait a minute, Grandpa said, holding up his hand, and don't rush me. He paused before going on. And so shall we. About a week ago, 2 men stopped here at the store, he said. Those fellows belonged to a circus train that was wrecked over on the railroad. From what they told me, it must have been a pretty bad wreck. One of the cars jumped the track and busted wide open. There were some valuable monkeys in that car, and a lot of them got away. Grandpa caught his breath and said, a few of the little fellows were killed in the wreck, but not many. The ones that lived were scared to death, and they took off through the hills. Now that circus was just coming out of winter quarters and had a pretty tight schedule laid out for the season. They didn't have much time between stops, but the crew did manage to lay over for a few days. They caught all but 30 of the monkeys. And I'm pretty sure those were the ones you and Rowdy ran into. Grandpa, I said, if those monkeys are the ones that got away from the circus train, how do you suppose they got way over here? It's 8 miles from our place over to the railroad. I've been thinking about that, said Grandpa. You know, this time of year it's hot and dry in the hills. I expect that the monkeys were having a tough time finding food and water. Now, all animals have an instinct that tells them where they can find food and water. Those monkeys probably just kept going till they wound up over here in these Cherokee Bottoms. There's food of all kinds for them over here. Wild grapes, berries, nuts, acorns, roots, and all kind of green stuff. I'll bet you're right, Grandpa, I said. Rubbing his hands together and looking as pleased as a fox in a henhouse, Grandpa said, just wait till you hear about the reward. All of those monkeys but one are worth $2 apiece. Now, how does that sound to you? $2 apiece, I cried. Boy, Grandpa, that's a lot of money. How come they're offering such a big reward for a bunch of little old monkeys? They're not just little old monkeys, Grandpa said. They've been trained for acts in the circus. That's why they're so valuable. Takes a long time to train a monkey, but you haven't heard the half of it yet. You're overlooking something very important. Overlooking something, I said. What am I overlooking, Grandpa? As if he were put out with me, Grandpa snorted and said, well, use your head and think a little. Remember everything I told you about those monkeys, and do a little figuring. Means math. Grandpa knew I wasn't too good with figures, and he was all the time making up some kind of old arithmetic problem for me to work on. It always made me feel bad when he did this, because I never intended to be anything but a hunter, or an explorer, and I couldn't see where arithmetic had anything to do with that. Grandpa, I said, with all this talk about monkeys and money, I can't even see good, much less do any thinking. What is it I'm overlooking? Grandpa snorted like Sally Gooden did when she had seen something. That last monkey, he said. I told you they were offering a $2 reward for all the monkeys, but one. Oh, I said, looking sheepish. I forgot all about that monkey. Why is it so important? Important, Grandpa said. That's the most important monkey in the whole works. He's worth his weight in gold. They're offering $100 reward for him. When I heard Grandpa mention that $100 reward, I lost my breath completely. My throat got as dry as the ashes under Mama's old washpot, and I had a heck of a time swallowing. I finally got a hold of myself and said in a loud whisper, $100 for one monkey? Grandpa, that must be some monkey. Grandpa chuckled and said, From what those fellows said, the monkey is so smart he's almost human. He's different than the other monkeys. Let's see now. What kind of monkey did that fellow say he was? Oh, yes. He's a chimpanzee, or something like that. Anyhow, they're offering $100 reward for him. I couldn't get over it. $100, I exclaimed. $100 for one monkey. Why, if I could catch all of them, I'd have more money than the United States Bank has in it. Just about, Grandpa said, chuckling. And I think we'd better keep this monkey business to ourselves. If word gets out, every farmer in these hills will quit farming and start hunting monkeys. We can't have that at all. We sure can't, I agreed. I won't say a word to anybody. This is the first time in my life that I've had a chance to earn any money. But what's bothering me is catching those monkeys. How am I going to do that? Right now, I don't know, Grandpa said. But we're going to catch them just the same. There never was an animal that couldn't be caught. All we have to do is figure out a way. Grandpa put on his thinking cap and started mumbling and grumbling. I couldn't understand one word he was saying. It always tickled me when Grandpa got something heavy like that on his mind. He did all sorts of things. Sometimes he'd start walking up and back, then he might start shuffling around in a little circle. He had a habit of pulling at the lobe of his right ear and rubbing his nose, or digging at the wiry whiskers on his chin. I learned a long time ago that when my grandpa put his thinking cap on, the best thing for me to do was to be patient. And above all, not to say anything. So I just stood there with monkeys, dollars, ponies, and 22s running around in my head and waited while Grandpa cut all kinds of didos. I could almost feel the idea when it hit Grandpa. Looking very pleased with himself, he smiled and said, I think I got it figured out. You can always figure out things if you use your head a little. I didn't like the way Grandpa looked at me when he said, use your head a little bit, but I didn't say anything. Walking over to the hardware part of the store, Grandpa picked up 6 small steel traps and a piece of baling wire. Coming back, he looked at me and said, I've got some old meal sacks in the storeroom. Go back there and get one of them. I flew to the storeroom and got the sack, wondering what in the world Grandpa was going to do. Spreading the sack out on the counter, Grandpa took a pair of scissors and started cutting long strips, about 2 inches wide from the soft material. Taking one of the traps, he mashed the spring down with his hands. Now take that wire and wrap it around the spring good and tight so it'll hold the spring down, he said. Taking the wire in both hands, I started wrapping the spring as Grandpa had told me. I was so excited and nervous I couldn't do anything right. Once I almost wrapped one of Grandpa's fingers into the spring. Take it easy, Grandpa barked. I don't want my fingers cut off with that wire. We've got plenty of time. Those monkeys won't run away. I'm sorry, Grandpa, I said, rubbing his calloused finger with my hand. Thinking about all those monkeys and all that money has got me so worked up I can't do anything right. Why, if I could catch all of them, I'd have more money than that Rockefeller man. Grandpa laughed and said, I don't know about that. I understand he has an awful lot of money. Once the spring was securely wired, the jaws of the trap were free and useless. Taking one of the cloth strips, Grandpa started wrapping the jaws. I saw right away what his idea was. With all that soft padding on the jaws of the trap, it probably wouldn't hurt the monkey's paw at all. Just to let Grandpa know I was using my head a little bit, I said, Boy, Grandpa, that sure is a good idea. Why, with the traps of the jaw wrapped like that, Monkey wouldn't even know it was on his foot. I think he'd know it was on his foot all right, Grandpa said. But once he gets in it, I don't think there's much he could do about it. After the jaws of the trap had been wrapped, Grandpa unwound the wire from the spring and released it. Holding the trap in his hands and inspecting his work, he grunted and said, It looks like a pretty good job to me. What do you think about it? It looks all right to me, Grandpa, I said. I don't see how it could ever hurt a monkey's foot. Laying the trap down on the floor, Grandpa mashed the spring down with his foot and set the trigger. Stepping back, he stood for several seconds looking at it. Then he grinned and said, just to be sure that it won't hurt a monkey's paw. I think it should be tested out, don't you? Tested out, I said. How are we going to do that, Grandpa? With a twinkle in his eye and a silly little grin on his face, Grandpa said, the only way I can think of is for you to poke your finger in it. I didn't even answer Grandpa. I didn't have to. My actions spoke for me. Closing both hands, I put them behind me and stepped back. Grandpa grunted and said, What's the matter? Don't you think I know what I'm doing? Sure, Grandpa, I said. I think you know what you're doing all right, but I had my finger in a trap once, and believe me, it hurt. Why can't we just poke a stick into it? No, said Grandpa, eyeing the trap and rubbing his nose. It wouldn't do any good to poke a stick at it. We wouldn't know then any more than we do now. For several seconds, we both stood there in silence, looking at the trap. Rowdy knew that something was going on, and got curious. He eased over and took a look at the trap himself. One look was all he wanted. He started backing up like a crawdad. Then, sticking his tail between his legs, he disappeared behind some boxes. I couldn't help smiling at old Rowdy's actions. He had gotten in a trap once, and had never forgotten it. Grandpa broke the silence by saying, Well, we're not getting anywhere just standing here. It still has to be tested out. Now I'm going to poke my finger in it. But if that thing hurts, you ain't have to help me get my finger out of it. You understand? I nodded my head and let him know that I understood, but I didn't like it at all. Well, here goes, Grandpa said. Closing both eyes, he reached over and tripped the trigger with his finger. The trap snapped, and Grandpa jumped. I closed both of my eyes and gritted my teeth. I didn't open my eyes again until I heard Grandpa chuckling. That's about the best monkey catching trap I ever seen, he said. It didn't hurt a bit. I could hardly feel it. All excited, I helped Grandpa get the trap off his finger. Then, working together, we wrapped the jaws of the other 5 traps. Handing the traps to me, Grandpa said, Well, looks like you're in the monkey catching business. Let me know how you come out. I told him I would, and thanked him with all my heart for helping me. Calling to Rowdy, I started for home. Just as I reached the door, Grandpa said, Hey, are you sure your mother didn't want something from the store today? My heart almost stopped beating. Digging Mama's list from my pocket, I said, Boy, Grandpa, I'm sure glad you reminded me. If I had gone home without the things Mama wanted, she'd have made me wear a girl's bonnet for a week. That's what she usually does when I forget something. Taking the list, Grandpa smiled and said, Well, that's what grandpas are for, isn't it? To look out for boys. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My old grandpa knew how I felt about him. While Grandpa was putting the things Mama wanted into a gunny sack, I thought of something. Grandpa, I asked, where am I going to set my traps? I believe I'd go right back to where you saw the monkey. If they're not in that bur oak tree, they're around there somewhere. Rowdy'll find them. On hearing Grandpa say his name, Rowdy whined, and his tail started fanning the air. Grandpa looked at him, grinned, and said, Say that again, partner. I didn't understand you. Do you want something? Rowdy really told Grandpa that he wanted something. His deep voice made the tin cans dance on the shelves. Grandpa grunted and walked to the rear of the store, and when he came back, he had a meat rind in his hand. Handing it to Rowdy, he smiled and said, Here you are, old fellow. That'll be 1 monkey you owe me. Rowdy pranced out of the store looking as proud as he did when he treed a possum. Grandpa, I asked, do you think I should use bait when I set my traps? Bait, Grandpa said. Now, I hadn't thought of that. Yes, I believe I would. I don't know what monkeys like to eat, I said. What kind of bait would you use? Well, let's see, Grandpa said. I'm not much of an authority on monkeys, but I think I read somewhere they'll eat most anything. Do you have any apples? We have a whole barrel of apples, I said. Papa got them from the Arkansas peddler. Fine, Grandpa said. Just set your traps in the dirt at the foot of the tree and hang an apple above each one. I think that'll do the job. Just before Grandpa handed me Mama's groceries, I saw him slip something into the sack. I let on like I hadn't seen this because I knew what it was. It was a sack of candy for Daisy and me, and was one item that would never find its way on Papa's bill. Here you are, Grandpa said, handing me the groceries. The next time you're up this way, I hope to see a sack full of monkeys. Putting my traps in the gunny sack, I said, You will, Grandpa, and one of them will be that $100 monkey. He's the Jasper I want to catch. End of chapter 2. Let's see here. How long's the next one? Yeah, we'll get started on it. I'm not sure how far we'll go, because 20 minutes right now, but We'll get into it. Chapter 3. On my way home, I whistled and sang. I was so happy I made up a little song. It went something like this. There are monkeys in the bottoms, in the tall white sycamores. There are monkeys in the bottom, worth $1 million or more. So come along, old Rowdy, let's get on the trail of $100 monkey. We'll catch him by the tail. Rowdy didn't seem to like my singing at all. He wouldn't even look at me. He just jogged along with his head down as if I wasn't even there. I was the happiest boy in those Ozark Hills, and I figured I was pretty close to being the richest boy, too. All I had to do was catch those monkeys. Right then, that didn't seem like any chore at all. Several times I stopped and tried to do a little arithmetic in the dust of the country road. Smoothing out a place with my hand and using my finger as a pencil, I tried hard to figure out how much money the monkeys were worth. I didn't have too much trouble adding up a column of $2 monkeys. It was that $100 monkey I had trouble with. Every time I added him to the pot, something went wrong. I'd get so rich and excited, I couldn't figure anything right. Rowdy didn't help the situation in the least. He couldn't understand what I was doing down on my knees in the middle of the road, fiddling around in the dust. He would get curious and come sniffing around to see what was going on. All he did was walk around in my figures and mess things up until I couldn't tell what the monkeys were worth. I finally gave up and decided I'd let Daisy figure it out for me. She was good at math. The road from Grandpa's store ran by our farm. As I walked along, singing my head off, Papa called to me from the field where he was planting corn. I climbed the rail fence and walked over to him. Papa smiled and said, "Say, it looks like you were right about those monkeys. Right after you left for the store, I went to get Sally Gooden, and I think I saw a monkey in every sycamore tree down there. I can't understand it. As far as I know, we've never had any wild monkeys around here." "They're not wild monkeys, Papa," I said. "They got away from a circus train that wrecked over on the railroad. Grandpa told me all about it. He said there were about 30 of them. They're worth a lot of money, too. The circus people are offering a reward for them." "So that's where they came from," Papa said, looking relieved. "I'm glad to hear that. I was beginning to wonder what was going on around here. Did you say they were offering a reward for those monkeys?" "They sure are," I said. "And it's more money than I ever heard of. They're willing to pay $2 a piece for all those monkeys but one, and they'll pay $100 for that one." I really bore down on it when I told Papa about that $100 monkey. Papa just stood there for a second staring at me. Then, uttering a low whistle, he turned and looked toward the river bottoms. "Say, that is a lot of money," he said. "I didn't know monkeys were worth that much money." "I didn't either, Papa," I said. "It beats anything I ever heard of. All that money for a bunch of little old monkeys?" Papa frowned and said, "There must be more to this than we know about. I can understand a fellow paying $2 for a monkey, but who ever heard of anyone paying $100 for one?" "Papa," I said, "Grandpa says those monkeys have been trained for acts in the circus, and it takes a long time to train a monkey. That's why they're so valuable." Papa was like me. He couldn't get that $100 monkey off his mind. "I don't care how long it takes to train a monkey," he said. $100 is $100. Why, you could buy a good mule for that much money, and if you talk just right, they might even throw in the harness." "Well, there's a catch to this reward business, Papa," I said. "Those monkeys have to be caught alive and not harmed in any way." "I see," Papa said, nodding his head. "I figured there was a catch somewhere. When it comes to making money like that, there's always a catch. It would be as simple to shoot the monkeys, but taking them alive, I don't know about that. It could just turn out to be a tough job." "I don't care how tough it is, Papa," I said. "If you'll let me, I'd sure like to give it a try. I believe I can catch those monkeys, every last one of them." Papa thought a second and said, "It may not be as easy as you think it is. How would you go about catching them?" "With these," I said, reaching into my gunny sack for the traps. "Grandpa fixed them for me. He thinks they're the very thing for catching monkeys and not hurting them." Papa took one of the traps and looked it over. Then he laughed and said, "Leave it to your grandpa to figure out something like this. But by golly, it does look like a good idea. Yes, sir, it sure does. It might work at that." Handing the trap back to me, Papa said, "You know, this time of year there's not much to do around the farm, just planting. And I can take care of that. You go right ahead and have a go at those monkeys. Maybe you can catch them. You've caught everything else in these hills." "I'll catch them," I said very determinedly. "You just wait and see. By tomorrow night, I'll have a sack full of them. And one of them will be that $100 monkey. He's the Jasper I'm looking for." "We'll see," said Papa, laughing. Glancing up at the sun, he said, "Now you better run along to the house and get your mother set those hens. I'd like to finish planting this field before sundown." I thanked Papa for going along with me on my monkey catching business and strutted off toward the house. So far, everything was working out fine, but there was one more stump in the way. That was Mama. I was well prepared for her, though. After all, I'd been living around Mama for 14 years, and a boy can learn a lot about his mama in that length of time. I knew just what to do and just what to say to wear her down. Papa had already told Mama about seeing the monkeys, but when I told her about the reward and that I intended to catch them, she did just what I expected her to do. She flew straight up. That means she, no. "Jay Barry," she said in a hard voice, "you're not going down in those bottoms to catch any monkeys. Now that's all there is to it. I won't have it at all. Why, I'd go crazy." Putting one of my half-dead, broken leg looks on my face, I got ready for one of those mama and boy go-arounds. "But Mama," I argued, "just think about how much money those monkeys are worth. And you know I never get a chance to make any money. Just 10 or 15 cents now and then for an old possum hide or something. Why, if I could catch all of them, I could get myself that pony in 22 I've been wanting for so long. You wouldn't keep me from doing that, would you?" I saw a hurt look spread over Mama's face. This made me feel bad, but I had been wanting a pony in 22, so I didn't want to give up. Or for so long, I didn't want to give up. Mama came over to me and started straightening my suspenders. It seemed like my old suspenders were always twisted. Grandpa said I had gotten to my britches too fast. "Jay Barry," Mama said, "I know how you've been wanting a pony and a gun, but I worry so much when you're down in the bottoms, just you and that old hound dog. Why, I never know what's liable to happen. Besides, it would be practically impossible to catch a monkey in those bottoms. Monkeys like to climb, and some of those sycamore trees are 100 feet tall. You'd probably fall out of one and break every bone in your body." Reaching for my traps, I said, "Mama, I'm not going to do any tree climbing. I'm going to trap the monkeys." Mama frowned and took one of the traps. She looked it over and said, "This is some of your grandpa's work, isn't it?" "Uh-huh," I said. "He fixed 'em for me." Shaking her head, Mama said, "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder who the boy is, you or your grandpa. Have you talked to your father about this monkey catching idea of yours?" Seeing that Mama was given a little, I started talking 100 miles a minute. "He said it was all right with him, Mama," I said. "There's not much to do around the farm right now, just planting. He said he could take care of all that." Handing the trap back to me, Mama sighed and said, "Well, between your father and Grandpa, it looks like I can't say no. But, Jay Barry, there's one thing I want understood. You're not going in those bottoms monkey hunting unless your father's close by in the fields. If something did happen to you, maybe between him and Rowdy, we could at least find your body." Mama could take a little bit of something like that and make it sound like the funeral had already begun. She was good at that. "Mama," I said very seriously, "do all mamas worry like you do? I'm 14 years old, almost a grown man. And you've been worrying about me ever since I was born. It makes me feel no bigger than a jumped-up minute." Mama smiled and said, "I'm pretty sure that all mothers worry about their boys. Right now, you're a little too young to understand, but someday you'll be married and probably have a boy of your own. Then I think you'll understand." "Oh, no, I won't, Mama," I said, shaking my head. "I'll never get married. I can't understand women." Mama got kind of mad when I said that. "Don't be silly," she snapped. "That wasn't a very nice thing to say. Now you go get that straw. I want to set those hens." Feeling as good as if I had just waded the Mississippi River, I breathed a sigh of relief and lit out for the barn to get some straw. Besides Sally Gooden, there was one other thing we had around our farm that I thought we could surely do without, and that was the setting hens. Setting hens mean they lay eggs. Mama and Daisy could do anything in the world with the hateful old things, but I couldn't. Every time I got close to one of the cranky old sisters, she'd puff up 10 times bigger than she actually was and start squawking and pecking. By the time we had the old gals taken care of, my hands were hurting all over. Mama and I went back to the house, and I was rubbing some Raleigh salve on my hen-pecked hands when I thought of my little sister. Mama, where's Daisy?" I asked. "I want to tell her about the monkeys." "I think she's up in her playhouse," Mama said. "I saw her going up the trail a while ago." Taking the sack of candy that Grandpa had given me, I started up to Daisy's playhouse. I was almost there when I heard her laughing and talking. Leaving the trail, I eased around and peeked through the bushes to see what was going on. A small sunbeam had bored its way down through the overhead green, and the playhouse was bathed in a warm, radiant glow. Daisy was sitting on the ground with her back against the tree of a huge red oak. Her crutch was lying beside her. As usual, her little friends were all around. Chipmunks were scampering and birds were singing. A churring squirrel was perched on the arm of the cross. His flicking tail kept perfect time to the music of the hills. A big fat bunny was curled up in Daisy's lap just as though he belonged there. As I watched, a tiny little wren hopped down from the branches of the red oak and lit on Daisy's crippled leg. She smiled and started cooing to it. Everything looked so peaceful and happy that I hated to disturb them. Just before stepping out of the bushes, I coughed to let them know I was coming. The instant I showed my face, you'd have thought a boogeyman had showed up. The bunny hopped and the squirrel jumped, the birds flew and the chipmunks faded into the ground. It always made me mad when the silly things did that. I would never have harmed one of Daisy's little friends. Old Rowdy wouldn't have hurt them either, and that was saying something. Feeling hurt all over, but letting on that I hadn't noticed anything, I handed the sack of candy to Daisy and said, "Guess what's happened?" Daisy always seemed to be about one jump ahead of me. Smiling, she said, "I already know about the monkeys, Jayberry. Papa told Mama and me when he brought Sally Gooden in from the Bottoms." Trying to act very important, I shoved my hands down in my pockets and said, "Those monkeys are worth quite a nice bit of money. I'm going to catch them and get myself that pony and gun I've been wanting." Sorry, I lost my spot for a second. Every time I mentioned catching something to Daisy, she naturally figured that I intended to kill it and skin it. Frowning, she said, "Jayberry, I know how you've been wanting a pony and gun, but isn't there some other way you can get them? I've seen pictures of monkeys, and they're the cutest little things. I just couldn't stand to think of one of them being skinned. I just couldn't stand to think, oh gosh, how would you like it if someone caught you and peeled your skin off? You wouldn't like it, would you?" "Aw, Daisy," I said, "you girls sure do think funny. Who ever heard of anyone skinning a boy? I'm not going to skin the monkeys. I'm going to catch them alive. They won't be hurt in any way." Daisy sighed her relief and said, "I'm glad you're not going to hurt them. Every time I walk by the smokehouse and see all those skins you have stretched there, I just shiver all over." "Well, you can stop shivering," I said. "I promise that I won't harm one hair on those monkeys." "How do you know so much about monkeys anyway?" Daisy asked. "Papa said he couldn't remember any wild monkeys being around here before." "Well, they're not exactly wild monkeys," I said. "They got away from a circus train that had a wreck over on the railroad. Grandpa told me all about it. He even fixed some traps for me so I could catch them." "That's just like Grandpa," Daisy exclaimed. "He's always telling you how to catch little animals. Surely, Jayberry, you won't get any fun out of it, do you?" "Aw, Daisy," I said. "What do you think animals are for anyway? Just to look at? They're supposed to be hunted. How else would a boy have any fun in these hills?" Shaking her head and looking very disgusted with me, Daisy said, "Jayberry, you should have a talk with the old man of the mountains. I think maybe he could tell you a few things. Being a boy, though, I doubt if you would understand a word he said." There it was again, the old man of the mountains. Daisy had mentioned him several times, and I hadn't paid much attention to her. After all, she lived in one of those girl kind of worlds, and it was chock full of strange old men, fairies, angels, spirits, knights in shining armor, and everything else you could think of. I just figured that all girls were like that, and it wasn't anything to get excited about. But Daisy had a way of making things sound so real that sometimes I didn't know whether to believe her or not. Daisy did this by telling stories. She was the best storyteller in those Ozark Hills. It wasn't only the stories she told, but the way she told them. She would get real serious, and her eyes would get big and starry looking. She would talk in a whisper and go through all kinds of motions. By the time she was finished with her story, my hair would be standing straight up, and I wouldn't know what to believe. "Daisy," I said, "you've been telling me about this old man in the mountains for a long time now. Who is he, anyway?" "Oh, he's just a friendly old man," she said pertly. "He comes around every once in a while and visits with me." "He does?" I said. "When was the last time you saw him?" "Why, just this morning," she said. "Right here in my playhouse." "You did?" I said. "What's the old man's name?" "I don't know what his name is," Daisy said. "I never have asked him. I just call him Old Man of the Mountains." "Where does he live?" I asked. "Way back in the mountains somewhere," Daisy said. "Was he a farmer?" I asked. "Oh, no," Daisy said. "He doesn't do any farming. He doesn't have time." "Doesn't have time?" I said. "What does he do?" "Well, he takes care of the hills," Daisy said. "Takes care of the hills?" I exclaimed. "Why, the hills don't need taking care of. Who ever heard of anything like that?" "That's all you know," Daisy said. "There are a lot of things in the hills that need taking care of. What would happen to all the little animals, the birds, and the flowers if someone didn't look out for them? That's what the old man of the mountain does. He just walks through the hills looking out for everything." I laughed out loud. "Aw, Daisy," I said, "you're just making this up. I don't believe there is an old man of the mountains." A frightened look flashed in Daisy's eyes. Placing her finger over her lips, she looked all around. "Shh! Don't say things like that, Jayberry," she said. "Don't you ever say you don't believe in the old man of the mountains. He hears everything that's said in these hills, and he'll cause you to have bad luck." At that moment, Daisy couldn't have said anything that would have had more of an effect on me. With all those monkeys around and a chance of making some money, I sure didn't want to have any bad luck. Besides, there were a few bad luck things that I believed in. Things like hearing a screech owl at midnight, or tripping over a broom, or dropping a water bucket in the well. Those were sure signs of bad luck. Now, maybe if there was an old man in the mountains, maybe he could cast bad luck, and maybe he would get all fired up if I said I didn't believe in him. Anyhow, I wasn't going to take a chance on it. Daisy, I said, is there really an old man in the mountains, and can he cause people to have bad luck? Looking at me as if I didn't have any sense at all, Daisy said, why, certainly, Jay Barry. There's an old man in the mountains. Everyone knows that. Well, I didn't, I said. With all of that bad luck talk, Daisy saw she had me worried, and she took advantage of it. Getting very serious, she took another look around and started talking in a whisper. Sit down, Jay Barry, she said, and I'll tell you about the old man in the mountains. I didn't want to, but I sat down by her side and listened while she went into her story. Jay Barry, she said, the old man in the mountains is very, very old. He's as old as these hills. His hair's snow white and hangs way down over his shoulders. He wears a long white robe and sandals on his feet. Every time I see him, he has a crooked stick in his hand. He can just point that stick at something, and it will disappear. Daisy, I interrupted in a low voice, is this old man a ghost or something? Oh, no, Jay Barry, she whispered. He doesn't even look like a ghost. He has a kind, gentle face. He looks sad, though, like maybe he feels sorry about something. I think he feels sorry for the little animals. I thought girls were the only ones that felt sorry for animals, I said. How come this old man feels sorry for them? Because it's his job to look out for them, Daisy said. You see, Jay Barry, when God made these hills, he needed someone to take care of the animals and the birds and the flowers. So he gave the job to the old man of the mountains. All he does now is walk around through the hills and take care of things. What does this old man do in the wintertime when the snow comes and everything goes to sleep? I asked. What does he do then? Daisy had an answer for everything. He goes to sleep too, she said. That's the only time he gets to rest. He works so hard through the summer that he's very tired when winter comes, so he just goes to sleep and rests until spring comes again. Daisy stopped to get her breath before going on. He's a wonderful old man, she said. If you're good and believe in him, you'll always be happy and you'll never have bad luck. But if you're mean and hurt the little animals, you better look out. He'll just point a stick at you and you'll be sure to have bad luck. Daisy had me so shaken up by now, I hardly knew what to believe. Just to be on the safe side, I said, when will you see this old man again? Oh, I never know when I'll see him, she said. He just comes around any time he wants to. Well, the next time you see him, I said, getting to my feet, you tell him I'd like to meet him, shake hands with him. All about then, I would have shaken hands with a centipede if I thought it was going to help me catch any monkeys. Shaking her head and looking very sad, Daisy said, Jay Barry, I don't know if the old man in the mountains would want to see you or not. You've been a pretty bad boy, you know. You're all the time catching little animals. The old man in the mountains doesn't like anyone who does things like that. But every boy in the hills catches things, I said. Why, the way you make it sound, this old man never could like a boy. Just girls. Oh, he could like boys too, Daisy said. He could like boys just as much as he does girls, but they'd have to leave the little animals alone, or he wouldn't. Well, I didn't know what to do. Daisy had me pretty well convinced that there was an old man in the mountains. Now, if he didn't like boys who caught animals and would cause them to have bad luck, I was in for it. And that's all there was to it. All right. And that is where we stop for today. Thank you all for joining me. And I'll see you next time.